welcome everyone to our May 5th special hearing, where we are going to begin the process of adoption for the master plan update. I'm sure most of you are aware that this has been a process in the making for 2 years, and we're excited to be at the point where the Planning Commission can now formally begin taking action on the master plan. Before we get started, I'll identify the present members of the Commission who are present and voting. We have Ms. Nunez, Mr. Carlson, Mr. Moraes, Ms. Jack, Ms. Treese, Mr. Trowbridge, Ms. Fuller, Mr. Bailey, and the chair. I believe the only member of the Commission who is not in attendance today is Mr. Greer. And I believe that if Mr. Greer is present for the second half of our hearing, which will occur on the 26th, he would need to review the contents of this hearing in order to be eligible to vote. And of course, we will not be taking any action today. However, it is important to identify who will be part of the process and who's in the hearing with us here today. And so with that, I think we are ready to begin the process with the staff introductions and a little bit of an explanation and background about the hearing.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Planning Commission. It's sort of weird having a mosh pit here in front of me. I guess I'll have to get used to that. Thank you all for being here today. Especially thank you for being willing to take this as a special hearing. Obviously, you're all very familiar with our workloads, and trying to get this onto a hearing when we had 6 or 7 other land use items, probably not the best idea. So we really appreciate you being willing to hang with us 2 days this week and get some of the county's business accomplished. So just going through the presentation order today, I'm going to do a staff introduction. We'll go through sort of an explanation of the hearing. Obviously, this is much different than what you usually see. You usually see quasi-judicial items. This is much different. This is legislative. There's a lot of things that are different because of that. Probably important right off the bat to acknowledge that this requires 2 hearings, so there will be no official action taken today. We have a second hearing for this item for the master plan scheduled for the 26th. So no action today, but we do still plan on taking public testimony today for as long as we need to, ending at 5 o'clock. Ms. Seago, the County Attorney's Office, is prepared to provide a legal background and authority for adoption of the master plan. And then we're going to go through our staff's presentation, sort of the background, if you will. Mark will be providing that presentation, helping inform those that maybe weren't as involved as some of you, those in the audience, of the history of the master plan in El Paso County, but also kind of how did we get to where we're at with the plan that's before you today. We would like to take a break at that point. Hopefully that's not the whole morning, and we can get John Halsey with Halsey Levine up to do his portion of the presentation, which is going to cover what the new plan includes. A lot of you have seen what that includes, but obviously for the public benefit, it's very important that we provide that overview. And then we'd like to take a lunch break, depending on how the time falls. If we need to take one earlier before John, we can do that. Or if we're not at a point where we're ready for a lunch break, then we can begin taking public testimony. Mr. Chair, I'll certainly defer to you on that. And then, as always, if anybody listening to this hearing or watching it online, if you'd like to provide public testimony today with the Planning Commission order on the 26th, there'll be an opportunity for that per the breakdown here in the order of the presentation. But you will need to email Tracy Garcia at tracygarcia@elpasoco.com with your name and a good number to reach you at. So most of you are very familiar with all the folks that have been involved, but I think for the record it's very important. There's a lot of work done over the course of 2.5 years, not the least of which was by Mark Gebhardt. Mark's been with the county for over 30 years, what a great asset to be able to have work on this project. I mean, Mark, as an employee, obviously, has been around and seen and done just about everything. I think this is his first master plan for the entire county, so we're still breaking new ground even with Mark. I think that's pretty noteworthy. Mark put in a ton of time, ton of long hours, weekends working on this project. Obviously myself, Craig Dossie, the director of the planning department. Nina Ruiz will be here today. She's going to be taking notes through Bluebeam if there's changes proposed to the plan as we go through, so that it's a little more transparent as to what the proposed changes are. That way, when we come back on the 26th, if there are word notes or revisions that were requested as part of this hearing, we'll be able to show you what those look like and track those as we go today. The sort of the brains of the operation, Tracy Garcia, as you all know, certainly takes care of all of you, more than takes care of me, which is probably a 3-person job, really. So we're very appreciative that Tracy's been with us through this entire process, even though she's leaving us soon. I'll pause for everybody to frown. Tracy's planning on retiring next month. You see, Tracy, I'm not the only one. So we will miss her, but I think she stuck around just to see this through, and we really appreciate that. Lauren Tossenson with our Public Information Office she's assigned to our department. She's been working on EPC Engage. She's been working on this master plan and getting information out to the public, working with all the media outlets. Lauren she's made this project so much better than it would have been otherwise. You're going to hear from John Halsey today. Also working with John has been Tricia Parks. As you recall, Sean left Halsey Levine about a month ago. About a month ago. I think he was finally too scared of all of you that he had to go do something else. Well, you're going to hear from John today. We're very appreciative that John's company put a bid in on this project. I think it made it a really good project. You're also going to hear from Andrea Barlow. Andrea not only is a local planner, has a firm in town that does a lot of the work that you all see in your normal role of quasi-judicial review of land use applications, but she was also appointed by the Master Plan Advisory Commission as the chairperson for that committee. So you're going to hear from her very briefly today. Did want to acknowledge that Mr. Bailey and Mr. Trowbridge served in the capacity of representatives of the Planning Commission for this effort with our Master Plan Advisory Committee. So they put in even more time than maybe some others, and we're very appreciative of that. And anybody who's listening, you can go to the link at the bottom if you'd like to view the master plan. So I'm going to speak to this slide, and then I'm going to shut up, and you're going to get to hear from the people that know a lot more than I do. I just want to briefly go over how we got here, what created the need for this master plan. Some of you that have been on the Planning Commission for a while, you probably know what created the need for this. As we review land use applications in our office and we refer those out to external agencies, we inherently have to consult with the master plan, and Mark's going to go through what that existing master plan looks like. But there were some challenges there, and some of the challenges, this is kind of the third bullet, is some of those plans were outdated. They didn't in any way identify what's happened in the county in the last, in some cases, 30 years, in other cases, 10 years. In terms of the increasing growth pressures, in terms of the extension or widening of certain roads, certainly did not integrate some of the more recent planning efforts that have been done across the county, either by our office with the Water Master Plan, or Public Works with the Major Transportation Corridors Plan, or our Parks Department. There are so many other planning efforts that have occurred since a lot of the master plan documents were adopted. It was time to update our master plan. The direction from the Board of County Commissioners was, we need better direction, we need better guidance on how to make these land use decisions, because the plans were outdated, and in some ways didn't even cover a lot of the county. There were areas of the county that did not have small area plans, and Mark will show you what that looks like. The timeline to get to today obviously is about 2.5 years. It was a little longer than we anticipated. We were hoping for about a 2-year process. There were little things that got in the way, like a global pandemic. But I think looking back on that and kind of reflecting on what that challenge presented to us. I think we went through as good a process as we could have with the public, with you all, with the committee. You know, obviously having the technology would have definitely helped. If we would have tried to have done this 10 years ago, there's just no way. We would have had to put it on hold. But we got through it. Sure, it wasn't, you know, as ideal as everybody would have liked. We'd have liked to have been in person with a lot of the members of the public. That just wasn't an option. But I am proud with the way that John and his staff and Mark and everyone else that was involved handled those challenges, because they were not easy, particularly 2020. I want to talk a little bit about the significance of this plan. Mark's going to cover it in more detail, but essentially we're replacing 30-some years worth of small area planning in the county with this effort. We're replacing the countywide policy plan. We're getting into a little bit more detail in some ways and a little less detail in other ways so that we can comprehensively plan for the entire county. This document, I hope to update every 5 years if we can, if we have the budget for it. But the significance of this plan is long-term, right? That's why we do this. It may be a 10-year, who knows? At the rate we've been going, could be a 30-year document. I hope not, but that's certainly possible. So, you know, I take this effort very seriously because I know that it lays the groundwork for probably my kids living in this area, your kids, maybe your grandkids, maybe even the next generation after that. It is significant, and it's going to help guide some of the growth that we're experiencing today and we anticipate to experience into the near future. And before I sit down, I just want to acknowledge the Board of County Commissioners who funded this project. The previous 5, and then adding Commissioner Geithner this year in supporting this effort. Every one of the commissioners has supported this. They've had really great comments on the master plan. They're very excited about this plan to help provide that guidance, but also to help move the county forward. We've been talking about that at the executive team level is, you know, the pandemic, we're kind of coming out of that. How do we turn the corner and move forward? The timing of this plan could not be any better for that. It's taking a renewed look towards the future, and I think what you're being asked to do today and on the 26th is going to perpetuate that and allow us to continue to look towards the future as a county. Obviously, huge acknowledgement to you all. You're going to sit here for 2 full days, in addition to the work that you already do for us, and nobody's increasing your salary in this capacity. So, I'm sorry to say, but we do have lunch, I think. So that's one of those fringe benefits, yeah. Our Master Plan Advisory Committee, Andrea's going to get up and speak, but they put in a lot of long hours, and these weren't people that were paid. These weren't elected officials. These were people who the Board of County Commissioners felt represented the interests of the county as a whole. It wasn't based on location. It wasn't necessarily based on their area of interest, but maybe they had multiple areas of interest and could really speak to what is the best thing for El Paso County moving forward. They did a lot of work on this. With that advisory committee, we had liaison members. They were more the subject matter experts or representatives. They put in a lot of time and energy as well, really helped kind of, and we talked about integrating some of these other plans. They really helped do that because of their previous experience. You know, I could go through a list of all the partner agencies that were involved as stakeholders in this, but I think we sent it out to 200 some odd outside agencies. Some obviously more involved than others, and that's probably appropriate. But all of those stakeholders that did participate, their input was very valuable, and it helped change the plan. You know, as it's sort of an organic thing even today, but it really helped change the plan for the better. Brought to our attention certain things that maybe we hadn't paid enough attention to. So we're very appreciative that they were involved as much as they were. Then obviously the members of the public. You know, this is the public's plan. This is not Craig Dossey's plan. This is not the Board of County Commissioners' plan or the Planning Commission's plan. It's a plan for the public. What do we want to be when we grow up, right? And helping the public understand that, help them understand that we're looking at this, we're looking at long-range planning in a little bit different way. There's a challenge there. Not everybody, you know, has the background that you all have, that we have, that John has. But we really appreciate the comments and interest of the members of the public. And then lastly, county staff. There's been so many county staff members who, and we talk about it all the time, already have really an unfair workload based upon how things are going in the real world. You know, even if it's from somebody from parks or from economic development or from Department of Transportation, their workloads are already high. Most of the departments are at least a little bit understaffed, if not significantly understaffed. To take the time to engage in this, knowing that it means as much as it does, we are so grateful. And obviously, I talk about Mark, but having Mark lead that and communicate with all those people and having those connections already in place really made this a better effort when it came to communicating with those other kind of topical experts. So we're really thankful that we had as much involvement as we had. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, but there were so many people involved. This isn't just county staff's plan. There's so many other voices that spoke to this plan. Any questions for me before I turn it over to Andrea?
I don't see any questions, but I have a couple of comments that I'd like to make at this point. First, Craig, thank you for your leadership in this process. Thank you for putting together sort of the vision of how this needs to move forward. As you indicated, this is a very pivotal point in the development of our community and our region, and I think the timing is couldn't be better, as you indicated. We're obviously facing a lot of growth right now, and to be able to have a framework in place to address that growth in a smart way is incredibly important for this county. As a lifelong resident of El Paso County and seeing the changes that I've seen over the last 30, 40 years, to think about what the impact will be with this plan for the county in the next 20, 30, 40 years, it really is a monumental and pivotal point, I think, for our community. So thank you for your leadership in that process, and Mark and Nina, thank you both for all of the hard work that you've put into it. And I also want to thank my fellow commissioners for the efforts that they've put in thus far and for the actions that we're going to be taking here in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair.
And I also think that it should be the purview of the commissioners to vote on whether or not Tracy is allowed to retire. Is that correct?
If it's okay, I'll make the motion. we can take a voice vote. I'm okay with that. I agree. And obviously Tracy had a lot to do with getting us here today as well. So thank you all for your time today, tomorrow, seemingly for the rest of the month. Really appreciate it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Andrea Barlow, here as the chair of your steering committee for the master plan, in different role to what you used to see me in, but I would have to say I very much enjoyed participating in this project. It has been very fulfilling as a professional planner to be involved in a master plan that shapes the community for the next 30 years or thereabouts. I really want to thank all the committee members. Everybody on the committee were very dedicated and really involved and provided very constructive discussion throughout the process. And in my opinion, was a very well-balanced committee with very different opinions and views, but very open to listening to other people's positions and making changes to address specific concerns and being flexible throughout. So I first would like to thank Ryan Warner, who was my co-chair. So he was representing a small business in the Black Forest. I'd also like to thank Tom Bailey for the Planning Commission representative, and Tim Trowbridge, who was the alternate. And then Becky Fuller, who was also on the Planning Commission, but initially, when appointed to the steering committee, was not, and representing small business interests. Sarah Britton-Jack, again, similarly, was not on the Planning Commission at the time of selection for the steering committee, but thank you for your input as well. And then in addition to that, we had Doug Stimple from Classic Homes representing the development industry, Phil Thomas, who was there representing the City of Fountain, and Matt Carroll, who was there representing, I think, primarily the kind of a bit of a mix of military, Black Forest, and so on. and then Mark Volchev, or General Mark Volchev as I know him, they're representing the military interests. Much appreciated the input of all those advisory committee members who, as I say, stayed fully engaged throughout. During a challenging time with COVID, we started off our process having in-person meetings and then had to transition to online meetings. But everybody, like I say, stayed committed and engaged, and much appreciated. I'd also like to thank our liaison members, Randy Case, who was there representing the Water Master Plan component, Victoria Chavez from the county there with regard to the Major Transportation Corridors Plan, Lonnie Inza from the Office of Emergency Management, Crystal Latier from the Economic Development Office for El Paso County, Brian Potts, he left about halfway through our process, maybe not quite halfway, but he was there a bit longer, and Ann Werner, who are representing PPACG, particularly in the context of the Joint Land Use Committee related to the military installations, Julie Sands, the Melendez from the Parks Advisory Board, and Ross Williams, and interchangeably with other members of the Parks Department, El Paso County Parks Department. And we also had various members who participate, not members, but liaisons to the local community groups who participated in many of the discussions, and we appreciate that also. We, as a committee, were involved throughout in helping to frame the vision of the master plan and then reviewing all the aspects of the proposed master plan. And it was a very thorough approach, and it's a comprehensive planning process, and it's called that for a reason. So we now have a comprehensive plan for the entire El Paso County area instead of a number of disparate small area plans, some of which were extremely dated. So we have a plan that provides the stepping stone to make planning decisions, to make your life hopefully easier moving forward and over the next couple of decades. So hopefully you like what you see in this master plan. And it is definitely our recommendation as the steering committee that you adopt this master plan as written. We have not only reviewed all the policies and the general approach, the place types, the areas of change, and so on, in a lot of detail. There's been also quite a lot of detail, what I call wordsmithing of things, just to try and make it more meaningful and understandable, and more easy to implement as well moving forward, so that there isn't any areas of that lacks clarity or has any grey areas for you moving forward. So we feel that this has been a great process overall, very inclusive. I actually went to some of the very early meetings of the local group organizations out in Ellicott and what have you, and there was Black Forest. I didn't attend that one, but there was a number of the area-based workshops, really, and they were very informative and very inclusive at that point in the early stages of the process, as well as a survey, and I think Mark will talk more about that. But just want to emphasize that this has been a very thorough process, and we've done a lot of work and committed a lot of volunteer hours to get here. Everybody here has volunteered their hours. We're not getting paid. And these meetings have been long and detailed, but everybody's also committed additional time to reviewing the plan in detail to discuss at those meetings. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the consultants' hard work. And above all, we appreciate staff's work on this, particularly Mark. He has tried to make our life easier by breaking down the comments and applying them to the actual master plan. So with that, I would just say we do recommend approval, and thank you very much for the opportunity to serve on this steering committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barlow. Any comments or questions? I want to, again, acknowledge and thank Ms. Barlow and her leadership, as well as thank the steering committee for their incredibly hard work through this process. Although we as commissioners have reviewed the master plan as it's currently presented in great detail. It's the hard work of the committee that got us to this point, and as you indicated, it's that wordsmithing, that fine-tuning, that very thorough analysis of the master plan that's allowing us to move forward with this today. And so again, thank you, and extend our gratitude to the rest of the committee members. So. Now, I think, Ms. Sego, are you going to give us a little legal background?
With the chair's permission, I'd like to just do that from the dais, if that's all right.
That'd be great. Thank you.
If we could move the slide forward. Thank you. So, adoption of a master plan is actually a duty. It's a requirement of a local planning commission. The statute that's in front of you, 3028-106, or the portion that's in front of you, sets forth the process that is required prior to the planning commission adopting the master plan. Adoption of a master plan is one of the few items that you will ever hear for which the Planning Commission has the final say on behalf of the county. The action that you take on May 26th will be the final action on behalf of the county to adopt, decline to adopt, or adopt with modifications the master plan that's being presented to you. As a legislative item, the Planning Commission has a great deal of discretion as to adoption of the master plan and the provisions that you choose to incorporate therein. You are only bound by constitutional provisions in adoption of a legislative item, and what that means in this context is that so long as the elements and the provisions of the master plan are rationally related to a valid public purpose, then the action that you take will be valid and pretty airtight from challenge. Do you have any questions for me with regard to the legal aspect of these proceedings?
Any questions? I think there are any questions, Ms. Sego, so thank you. And with that, I believe we're ready for the presentation from Housel Levine, or Mr. Gebhardt.
Good morning. Mark Gebhardt, Planning Department. Used to be Planning Department, then it was Land Use Department, then it was Planning or Development Services Department, and now it's Planning and Community Development Department. We have a series of PowerPoints, and hopefully we don't go over too many things that have been previously said, but we're kind of at an interesting time right now. We're at the final adoption process of something that we've been working on for several years. I have to apologize for sending you a package of all this information. If you didn't print it out, that's single-sided of the various information that we provided to you relative to the process. Process outcome, public comments, etc. For background, the current El Paso County Master Plan consists of the policy plan, done in 1998. It's rather interesting. Some of the comments we've now received from some of the review agencies actually are family members, daughters of people that helped prepare that policy plan. That's interesting. And the policy plan actually replaced a 1990 land use plan prepared in 1970. So the 1970 plan that was approved carried forward to the 1998 plan, which updated it and replaced it from a map-type document in part to a policy-type document. The other things, that's the overarching part of the master plan. Then there are 10 small area plans. Those date from 1977 to 2008. We'll go over those in a map and some additional detail. There are specific topical elements that are referenced, and we'll go over those. Drainage basin plans are adopted as a master plan, and the basis of that is because state statute says if you're going to charge or require drainage basin planning fees, you have to have those adopted as a part of your master plan. And we've implemented that since 1986 time period. There are a series of older sketch plans that actually amended the master plan. They did it differently in the 80s, and the reason I believe they did those, I wasn't around in 82 when they started, but I was around in 86 when they ended it. When you have a discussion of consistency or conformance with the master plan, many of these sketch plans conflicted with the master plan. Therefore, I think the county created this process that you could adopt those sketch plans as an amendment to the master plan, and then your zoning would be in conformance with both the sketch plan and the master plan. We don't see a need to do that anymore. The world's changed in that. The thinking has changed. The master plans are now up. The overall master plan is now updated in a different manner now. So when those are the ones that are there, I mean, previously done, now you would adopt some things that change those things. Your El Paso master plan would replace the policy plan. It would replace the small area plans. It would replace those sketch plans, but retain the topical elements in the drainage basin plans. You know, Craig spoke briefly or spoken about what your master plan will be used for, your El Paso master plan. I don't want to use the word county in that discussion because it will be used to share the vision. Craig has reported or updated other departments on our master plan efforts. They've been a part of those efforts. Hopefully this will be a document that other entities can potentially use. Of course, we're going to use it to evaluate development proposals, and those development proposals include almost all actions of the county that have a reference to consistency or conformity to the master plan, which would include things that you may not even hear, which would be 1041 actions. There is a specific reference of consistency with the master plan in those. The master plan also gives guidance to establish a regulatory framework going into the future. Normally, often, regularly, when you do a new master plan or a new comprehensive plan, you look at your zoning regulations to try to implement those visions that are created in the master plan. That's likely going to occur after this master plan effort is done to try to bring any changes to those regulations to be consistent with the efforts that have been put forward here. And it will be used to coordinate local and regional initiatives going forward. It's not just the counties. One of the challenges is the county encompasses all the municipalities. Everyone, we don't plan for them, we don't have jurisdiction them, but if we ignore them, we don't have an effective plan. We need to coordinate those efforts. These are the specific elements of the master plan that would be deleted as a part of this. To give you a little background, and I'll have a map that shows it, the Woodman Valley Plan is one of the older plan, and it was a citizen-generated plan. Had really only affects Woodman Valley west of I-25, where there's a series of generally unplatted 2.5 to 5 acre lots that the city has not yet brought those into the city limits. The public doesn't necessarily want it. They have some services from the city. The Ute Pass Plan, 1982, some of the challenges with the Ute Pass Plan is it recommended clustering, and there is no wastewater system that occurs in Ute Pass. There is no supplier of wastewater service in that area. And so how do you achieve clustering of residential development without that central supplier? That became some challenges for that. The Highway 94 plan has been updated to be in 2003, and it, interestingly enough, includes Colorado Center. For a strange reason, if you think of Highway 94, essentially around Schriever Air Force Base, actually includes Colorado Center, and that's really because there was no other plans for Colorado Center If we would have done a Fountain Valley plan, we might have included that in the Fountain Valley, but we didn't have that opportunity. Highway 94 plan really was generated based upon Schriever Air Force Base coming to the community. That was the first set of plans that occurred that started to accommodate the potential growth, and was then updated in 2003. The South Central plan, really the impetus for the South Central plan was one idea of having a toll road going through that area. And that was a great battle with that South Central plan. And it really recommends, the challenges there are that the South Central area has very limited amount of water supply. They are not covered or don't have access to the Denver Basin aquifers. They end about the Space Center. So there's really very little aquifers down there, and the primary growth avenue is 35-acre parcels. That was ultimately a challenge in that the 35-acre parcels are kind of hard to plan for because they're not subject to subdivision regulations if you're larger than 35 acres. The Ellicott Valley Comprehensive Plan in 1989 kind of said, I don't mean to pick on the people that created that plan, but it was a wide open plan. It kind of said, if you can accomplish central water and central sewer, you can have high densities in this area. And that really covered a lot of the areas in the Ellicott area. And now we've got more of a targeted plan for that Ellicott area, specifically reflecting Schriever Air Force Base and potential suburban activity that may occur coming into that area, which you've seen plans for in recent years. The Southwest 115 comprehensive plan was, there's not that much growth in the Highway 115 corridor because it's encumbered by BLM land and forest land. The major issue, and you may have heard of that recently, was related to gravel quarries in that area. The gravel quarries are actually covered by the mineral master plan that we have as a separate topical element. The Falcon-Payton Comprehensive Plan is the newest plan in 2008. It's hard to believe that 2008, how long ago that really was, and what's changed since 2008. That's one of the major challenges with our efforts now of trying to develop an overall countywide plan, is what's changed in the last 2.5 years for our plans. That's what's really hard to keep up, and we'll go into a little bit about that. But if you start to think, what's been annexed since 2008, or in any of those plans, or in the 2-year time period that we've since been dealing, Banning Lewis North. The city's acquired Corral Bluffs land, additional land. They've acquired additional land down off Highway 115. Banning Lewis has expanded. Wolf Ranch, annexations going further north are very successful in development in those areas. So there's been a lot of changes occur. The Midland Fountain Creek Corridor Plan is really a hard to use plan, but it was an entryway plan for Fountain Creek that's never really been implemented regarding Highway 24. The Tri-Lakes Comprehensive Plan in 1999, there's been a lot of changes in the Tri-Lakes area that are going forward. And I think there's been a community change that's occurred. And I think it's much more, whether we like it or not, it's much more related to growth and activities in the Denver area. There's a lot more interest in commuting from this area to the Denver area. So those are the things that we're taking away. We're taking things away, and then we're making an overall plan that puts them all together. So the current master plan, you would, oh, I skipped over Black Forest? Sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't purposely skip over Black Forest, although I may be accused of that. The Black Forest plan, the original Black Forest plan, I think, was done in 1974 and then was updated in 1987. As you've seen from the public comments we've received, Black Forest is a very active area for public input. They have provided significant comments through the master plan process. I don't know that they all agree with the proposals that are in this plan, in the large lot proposals, and we'll have some discussion ultimately of our large lot proposal that has land that would include 2.5 acres and larger. And that's because as we get into place type discussions, our large lots really are key to our design of subdivisions and our zoning regulations that utilize or provide that you can have well and septic on parcels of 2.5 acres or larger. You have a different road design on rural properties in that area. We chose to use that as the benchmark for what was urban below that and what was rural above that. The current master plan includes this plan as we're proposing now, and these topical elements. The topical elements that really key back to the Planning Commission really have been the major transportation corridor plan and the Parks Master Plan, because those are frequently updated. The rest of the plans are not updated as frequently, although I believe that we will see a request to update the Colorado Springs Airport Master Plan and a request to the county to adopt that plan as well, coming in this year or later in the next year potentially. And Meadow Lake Airport study may request also some updates to their master plan as well. The Water Master Plan you've recently adopted. The extraction of commercial mineral deposits, the deposits don't really change. They're what's in the ground. I'm not sure there's a reason to update it. That's a very technical related document going forward. The wildlife habitat maps and descriptors, that was prepared by the Division of Wildlife. And I don't know if we have any opportunities to update those in the future, but certainly the wildlife habitat maps and descriptors have changed as this area has grown. And the drainage basin plans. Each time there's more than 20 drainage basin plans that have to be a part of that, and those often are frequently updated, and those come back to you essentially if they are updated or if they cover a new area. So we're hitting back on some of the topics. To get back, this was planned to be a 2-year effort. It was planned to be completed in 2020. Some things changed, made it real challenging to accomplish those things. Many people don't realize that the authority to adopt a master plan lies with the county. Those folks that live in the city think that this all goes to city council or some other action. County commissioners have received comments and emails, et cetera, on the master plan. They forward those to us. We've had those as a part of your documents going forward as well. They do not adopt the master plan. They help create the committees that do that. They help fund the process going forward, but they're not the entity that takes action. Throughout the process, we've said this is kind of what our planning process. We adopted that from the consultant, essentially. Where are we now? Where are we going? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And the master plan would be an envision of how we start to get there. There's some recent actions that have occurred that justify why we're doing this. Craig hit some of those in his presentation. The challenge would be if we had to update each of the small area plans, what would the budget look like for those 10 small area plans? And that doesn't even cover the areas of the county that don't have a small area plan. The choice was to do this as a more comprehensive effort. But you will note that Plan Colorado Springs is recently adopted. Monuments adopted a plan, Fountain, Manitou, and I've got some pictures of those. Green Mountain Falls adopted a new plan last year. The Corridors Plan will be updated next year. It was previous, and it's updated on a 5-year time period. The Water Master Plan is a brand new plan going forward that gives guidance, and for reference people or people that are listening in the audience, we use some of the growth projections, area projections, et cetera, from the Water Master Plan to become priority areas in this planning process. The Council of Governments, Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, has adopted the joint land use study for the military bases last year. The 208 plan, which is the water quality management plan by the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, was adopted last year. The broadband master plan is really technically, it's broadband strategic plan, which was adopted by the Board of Commissioners last year. And the Colorado Springs and Pikes Peak Destination Master Plan was adopted in the last 2 years. And that's important. The Destination Master Plan, that's an interesting challenge of state statute, that there's a cross-reference that that's a required element of county master plans. So all these things are happening right now. It's a great time to adopt this new plan going forward to try to bring those in. We are not asking to adopt any of these other entities' plans as a part of your master plan. They become a guidance document or a input into our new master plan. I stole this also from the consultant as well. I want to step back and say, this is the steps we took to get to where we are now. We're clear down now in 8 or 9, but you had to start the project, and the project started in 2019, just shortly after adoption of the Water Master Plan in December of 2018. And we've gone through each of these steps, and it's easy to forget what we did for community outreach and engagement at the start of the process, and how there were a series of public meetings, and how many people we contacted, and how they provided input into that. I don't want people to forget that part of the process, because that ultimately created the vision. And those all became the basis of the existing conditions report that you've seen a copy of and hopefully have a copy. That was a good background to where we are, to know where we're going to go. One of the important things that the advisory committee ended up working on and utilizing is number 7, countywide plans and policies. Several members, and for background, Becky and Sarah were on the were part of the advisory committee before they ever got appointed to the Planning Commission. And Sarah had to step back off that because she's on other committees, and the county only allows you to be on several committees as a part of the process. But they'll remember how detailed we went through in the summer. We spent the whole summer at meetings every 2 weeks going through each of those small area plans and the goals and policies of those plans and how they could become integrated in this planning process. Now we're at the step of plan, document, and adoption in this process. Andrea went through this process of who's on the committee and why we had that input. The liaison members over here on the right were important because they represented other parts of the documents that we may not have been as familiar with ourselves and could be a part of that. These are the current planning areas for each of the, and Chairman, if you end up needing a break through my process, that's fine, that doesn't bother me. But these are the planning areas for the small area plans. Highlighted here was Falcon because that was the most recent it was done. Eastern County plan, there is no plan for the Eastern County. That never got accomplished. Fountain Valley plan, that never got accomplished. Black Forest, I'll show you a picture a little bit. The Black Forest and Falcon Peyton, there's some overlapping jurisdictions that have occurred within those areas. That's interesting. That picture, I'm having some challenges here on pictures coming up. I'm sorry that this had a series of, I may have to show this later. It is a series of how these plans interact with each other. It's where we have conflicts, where areas that don't have plans, where areas that are annexation within the city that are enclaves. And I'm sorry that I may have to recover this. See what it's doing? No, it's the next one. It showed the overlapping plans.
Clicked on it. It's okay.
Okay, I need the next picture, though. Oh. Computer seems to be going haywire up here, but she helped me. This was a part of the discussion of why we're doing this. No master plans in the east. No master plans in the Fountain Valley. What? Just click that one. Sorry, technological issues with your presenter. It's called age-related. What we've also found was there was inconsistent terminology in some of the Tri-Lakes area. There have been battles on the Planning Commission relative to what the plan really said in those areas. The overlapping plans occur between the Black Forest plan in this area and the Falcon-Payton plan. We'll show a map of a bunch of enclaves. The city and the county are now working on developing plans for those enclaves. Mr. Dossi didn't mention the IGAs that are being worked on or have been approved relative to those planning processes. This map is old enough it doesn't even show the Ellicott plan, because I didn't want to create an entire new map to show that. But there's some overlapping buffers between the Ellicott plan and Schriever Air Force Base, or the Highway 94 plan. So background, we did some, at the start of the process, there was community outreach and surveys. They were done by the consultant primarily as a part of that process. We forget, and one of the comments you may have seen in some of the documents you've read, we had 3,000 responses to the survey and over 800 public contacts, and someone says, well, gee, you only captured 0.7% of the entire county. Well, 3,800 was a pretty good challenge to go at that time period. Our PIO office has been wonderful at providing publication and information, putting out on the website. As you're aware, there's a website for the project. It has all the information relative to the project going forward as it's gone through. And the PIO has put out press releases. On our main page right now, you can see a contact for the draft master plan. They've been a part of this process for the whole effort. They videoed public meetings we had. If you actually go through it, the Master Plan Advisory Committee had 23 meetings, and then there are a series of public meetings that went forward, and those are videoed, and many of those appear on the website and on YouTube, and you have to actually view all those. I'm sure those that have been there say that I don't want to go back there again and view all those again. But there's an extensive amount of information going through that history, and I want to say the history because that's really important, how you get to the process. That's from the start to the end of this process. One of the things after we started the process, we did some analysis of what's changed in the area. How do you know that you need to update the plan? This is from the Tri-Lakes plan. And these are all my little notes on it that says this property's been annexed, this property's been annexed, this has been annexed, these has been developed, these need to be developed over here. So we went through some of that analysis to get to that process. I mentioned earlier that there's urban and then there's rural, and we use the descriptor of generally rural at 2.5 acres based upon other standards within our code. That's a fairly logical break we utilize. I just bring in some history for you. This is the 1942 zoning map. This is the original county zoning map. And you can see this is Templeton Gap Road, and probably out somewhere here is Academy. You've got Palmer Park, didn't extend past the north end of the county. Many people don't realize all of the Broadmoor was developed in the county's jurisdiction. That wasn't annexed until 1977 time period. So we forget those things in history, and I try to bring you back to some of those. You often hear in your staff reports of when this area was first zoned. This is in our zoning map directory at the front, and I'm sorry it's not entirely clear, but there have been 11 different zoning actions of the county that did certain areas. The most recent was 99 in the eastern county in the 11 area over here that encompassed the entire eastern half to third of the county, mostly with an A35 zoning. One of the things that is key in this that I hope to impart on you to remember is they did these as blanket zonings. So if there was a parcel that was 5 acres in the A35 zoning that was a legal parcel, it created nonconformities. And you see those often in some of your discussions and staff. What you may not realize that Black Forest, or what's traditionally called Black Forest, was zoned in 2 different actions, part of it in 55, part of it in 65. That becomes an interesting discussion, and I would point out that while 5 acres is the predominant development in Black Forest, there are hundreds of parcels in Black Forest that are less than 5 acres. Some served by Central Water, most have 5 acre zoning, but are less than 5 acres in size. And that's kind of that history of they did things as a blanket zoning of an area rather than do some sort of analysis. If you had to do it over, I wish they'd done a detailed analysis, but they didn't, and that's the past, and we're not there now. One thing people don't also realize is what's owned by the State Land Board in El Paso County. This is a real telling map going forward, or as a part of this. And you may, if you're aware of statehood, when Colorado became a state, the State Land Board was granted Section 16 and 36 in areas that weren't already patented, i.e. the mountain areas that had already patented by mining claims. And the charge of the State Land Board is to generate revenues for the school system. Okay, so if you look in El Paso County, how do they generate revenues for the school system in here? Most of it is grazing land. At the start of this process, we asked the State Land Board, and you'll see in our existing conditions report, if you look at the drawings in there, it shows this as managed land. Managed land is owned by the State Land Board or the federal government, et cetera. But when we met with the State Land Board, and we've had several discussions with them, their concern is we had proposed to include the managed land essentially as open space. They said, no, wait a minute. We may need to sell some of that land or dispose of that land, and open space is not a proper descriptor of it. And in fact, this area's map is old enough that you see in the middle of Schriever Air Force Base, the State Land Board at this time owned the center of Schriever Air Force Base. They've now transferred that ownership as a part of that process. So that becomes some of the history. I mean, it would have been great if we had some promise that State Land Board properties would always stay as open space, but we don't have that promise. Interesting map on some of the small lot developments that occurred, and this is an older map, but it shows areas that were occupied by even smaller lots in the eastern county. And I don't want to dig deep into it, but it shows, in fact, there's a number of parcels that may not meet that A35 zoning that existed at that time. I just thought it was a neat map, so I added it. In this discussion, we've mentioned the City of Colorado Springs and Plan COS and the discussions that have occurred relative to an IGA and other documents. This is a map from the City of Colorado Springs that presented to City Council as a part of a PowerPoint presentation they had, and it becomes some of the framework of essentially our planning process that we've carried forward. You'll notice there's a series of areas of interest for annexation. Originally, this was potential areas of annexation, and we carried that drawing forward, but you can see that it includes areas clear out past Reaver Air Force Base that may have some potential or areas of interest for annexation. We've caught a lot of heat for including Flying Horse North as an area of potential annexation or interest of annexation, but we captured that right off of this map going forward. We did not include some of these areas of Black Forest in here because those are already existing residential lots primarily. So we brought some of this forward, those other plans, and if you need to see, I have those complete documents. We can ultimately provide them if you need to. One of the challenges with the city is enclaves and near enclaves. And how do we deal with that in the county? We made the early choice to call the enclaves and near enclaves as transition areas, that expecting something to happen with those if the city provides water or sewer or annexes those. We didn't say that they have to be all urban. We didn't call them employment centers per se. We just essentially transition areas, although we made changes in the Cimarron Hills area because of the airport-related issues that occur there and potential impacts in our accident potential zones and in our zoning regulations. So the city, as a part of their process, is developing a plan for an annexation plan going forward. Their original 2006 annexation plan now would be updated in 2021 by the end of the year. And it'll have some of that additional framework going forward. They use the reference of a near enclave in several locations, and this is an example. If you see that discussion in our document, a near enclave is something many people don't realize that the Air Force Academy is county jurisdiction. I mean, it's a federal base, so we don't exert zoning jurisdiction, but it's not within the city limits. Neither is Fort Carson, neither is Reaver Air Force Base. And so the Air Force Academy on West Woodman Drive creates what they call a near enclave because it's not truly an enclave. By statute, it has to be surrounded by a city. Some of those boundaries of how we plan those areas for potential annexation are in part based upon where the city has service. It's interesting, the city really restricts water and sewer, primarily the city, but they do have contracts for some areas outside the city, but they provide gas and electric at other locations outside the city boundaries. So, we used Fountain's plan. This is Fountain's future land use plan, and they also have a 3-mile plan. We use that as a part of our plans going forward. We tried to match their plans and our plans going forward, and we had meetings with Fountain and the other jurisdictions. We used Manitou's plans as well. You can see some areas that are potential annexation in the Cave of the Winds and some areas down south that are not presently in Manitou. We use some of the monument plans. And this is their 3-mile plan, and you will see as you start to look in the county's plans on these northern areas that we've shown, we intend for those to be, whether they're developed in the county or in the town of Monument, they would be higher intensity growth areas. So you've seen the existing conditions report. Now is a good time to take a break because when John Housel will come up. Any questions of me? I'm sorry I felt I needed to have a lot of that background to get to know where we're going.
That was very good background, so thank you. Mr. Gebhardt. Any questions at this time for staff? Okay. Seeing none, we'll take a short recess and be back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to call the Planning Commission hearing back to order. We left off after the completion of the staff presentation, or staff introduction, I should say, and I believe the consultant, House Levine, is going to make their presentation and answer questions if we have any. So with that, fire away.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is John Houseel with Houseel Levine Associates. We were the lead consultant on the assignment, the El Paso master plan. And I think first, before I get into my presentation, I'm just going to echo a little bit. I know not to repeat a lot of what's been said. I'm not going to repeat anything, but we do this all over the country with counties and cities and MPOs and other organizations. And the level of effort put forth by Craig and Mark and the entire county staff, the advisory committee, and as well as the other people who have participated, has really been exemplary. And we've seen the good, the bad, the ugly of effort locally, but it has really been remarkable here. So I think for anybody who is watching or listening, to know that the people who are charged with safeguarding the best interests of this community, of the county, whose only dog in the fight is to do what is best for the residents and businesses that live here, know that you have some real champions on board. And I think that's important to state. We come into a lot of places and it's turnkey. We have to do all of it. And we're prepared to do that, and we do. But the level of effort has been nothing short than Herculean by your staff and your advisory committee. And I just want to go on the record and say that that is truly appreciated. And it was work incredibly well done, incredibly thorough, made our jobs much better, much easier to have a counterpart like that within our client communities. And the net result is this plan is infinitely better than it would have been otherwise had that not level of effort been there. So I just want to get that on the record. It's one of the most important takeaways, I think, from the last couple of years. So what I want to do is go through the comprehensive plan, the master plan. I'm going to sort of hit the high notes of it. I'm not going to read through you a 150-page long document. There is a lot, I know, disappointing, right, Becky? There is a lot in here. It truly is comprehensive. And I think as important, or probably more important, is what I'm going to go over now, is what Mark and Craig went over, particularly what Mark went over. That context is crucial for anybody who's listening or paying attention over the last couple of years or considering reviewing this document now prior to adoption. If nothing else, the takeaway ought to be there are a lot of variables at play in El Paso County that have to be considered right now. You have planning documents that we examined thoroughly line by line that really right now create a quilt, a patchwork, which provides a planning context for the county with several documents ranging from 14 to over 44 years old. That's old if you have a community that's not changing, let alone a community that is dramatically changing. Those documents just will not carry the day. The other big takeaway here is to remember the diversity and the makeup of El Paso County. The study area is over 2,100 square miles. You'll find few comprehensive plans that even attempt to tackle something that big. You go from dense urban type of development in some areas to as rural and as natural and conservation areas as you will ever find anywhere in the United States, and everything in between. You go from prairie land to desert to mountain slopes to wooded upland areas. An ecological and environmental range of diversification you will find in almost no other study area in the United States. And an area that is projected to grow by 250,000 over the next 25 to 30 years. A new plan right now is essential because the patchwork of older plans you have on the books now simply will not provide you the guidance and platform you need to effectively manage and ensure quality of life over the next 20 to 30 years. So with that said, I'm going to rifle through some of this now. Again, we can come back and answer anything in more detail. I think you can see just from the level of review that Mark gave, an incredible level of knowledge and insight from staff. So the plan chapters that are in the document, there are 14 of them. They go from introduction, community vision, land use, housing and communities, economic development, transportation and mobility, community facilities, infrastructure, military, recreation and tourism, community health, environment, resiliency and hazard mitigation, and implementation. And we heard a little bit earlier about, from Lori, some of the legal footing for the authority to do this coming from the state enabling acts. And every state is different. In some states, they're general plans. In some states, they're master plans. In some states, they're comprehensive plans. On the East Coast, they're called plans of conservation and development, POCDs. And every state has unique requirements. In Colorado, for instance, you're required to address tourism in your comprehensive plan. That's unique to any other state. And that's because it is so crucial to the state of Colorado in terms of economy and quality of life that counties and municipalities are required to at least address tourism in their comprehensive plans. So one unique characteristic about comprehensive planning in the state of Colorado versus other ones. So what is a master plan? A little bit about this. The best way to think about a comprehensive plan or a master plan, I think, from having done more than 100 of these across the country, is it is a foundation for decision making. It is not regulatory. Planning is not zoning. It does not dictate what you can and cannot do with your property. It is a foundation for decision making. It is meant to be able to provide a way for staff, developers, business investors, commissioners, council members, make better decisions in a uniform manner, working toward mutual objectives several years out. The best way to think about it sometimes is like a football team. A receiver has a very specific role on the team, very specific way he works out, very specific things he has to do while they're playing the game. The quarterback has very specific things he has to do, very different in what their responsibilities are on the field. But if they do not work together, the team will not score. Everybody has to do their part. If they work together, this is the county's playbook. And there are a lot of players on the field. But it is a foundation for decision making. It's a more coordinated approach to planning across the entire county. As Mark went through very diligently, you have several different plans of several different sized geographies, going back anywhere from 14 to more than 44 years old. Those are no longer, in a lot of cases, relevant to collectively provide the type of planning you need. And it goes over several key planning considerations. From Mark said as well, clearly this was not developed in a vacuum, okay? This process could not have been more transparent, could not have been more actively seeking of input from everybody. It has had the eyes, ears, voice, and touch of thousands of people who live in El Paso County. And we took several of these into consideration. So some of the key planning considerations were the extensive community engagement that we've gone over already, the regional context. We're not starting with a blank slate here. We have to begin working in El Paso County with El Paso County today. And you have a very unique regional context within the state, within the Front Range, and within the nation. The multi-jurisdictional context of planning in El Paso County that became very clear in some of Mark's comments and Craig's. There's a lot of players in El Paso County and a lot of things in El Paso County that the county does not have jurisdiction over. And a lot of these agencies, whether they are facilities or services or taxing bodies or service providers, all have some of their own autonomy with some of the decisions they have to make. The county has to plan with and in coordination with all these other jurisdictions. So the multi-jurisdictional nature of planning in the county is one of the biggest considerations. The existing land use, again, we have to take what's on the ground now into consideration when we take a look at what we want to be on the ground 10, 20, 30 years from now. Environmental conservancy and considerations. Like I said, you have some of the most stunning ecological and environmental systems and features of any place in the United States. And when we talked with thousands of people, what do you want to think one of the highest rated comments and concerns was from everybody we spoke with, whether they were an industry leader, a service provider, or a resident. And it doesn't matter what part of the county they were a resident from. A dense urban area, maybe someone living in an apartment or someone living on a 10-acre ranch. The environment, the quality of life, the natural environment, these features were first and foremost important to the residents of this community. And then finally, your demographic and market analysis. To figure out where you were headed in terms of market, where you were headed in terms of population growth and complexity, so we can make a determination as to what types of uses would actually be viable. There's no point in making land use recommendations if they're not viable recommendations from a market perspective. It may make people happy, But a developer or a landowner would look at it and say, like, that's never going to happen there. There's zero market. So what you're proposing might as well be playland, because that will never happen. There is no market support for that. So while it's important for a plan to be visionary, it has to be viable. And that's the balance of a long-range plan. So real quickly, community engagement and feedback. Over close to 4,000 people have participated so far. This may even get updated by the time the plan gets adopted from the people who have been participating over the last couple of months as the plan has been made available online. And then we go through all the different touch points, whether they were online surveys, online interactive mapping, one-on-one interviews, small group discussions, large group discussions, or online forums. But again, this plan has been heavily viewed, heavily vetted, and not by accident, but actively participating in terms of trying to get people to view this. I believe this was sent out to over 200 agencies and organizations and said, here it is, please give us your feedback. And it was sent out via email with a link to over 2,000 people. So we have actively tried to get as much feedback as possible. Regional context is crucial. Where you are on the Front Range, it really puts you in incredible proximity to a lot of valuable features, habitats, businesses, opportunities. And again, the study area is about 2,100 square miles. The town I live in would barely even register as a little blip on this map. The town I live in would be about as big as one of those highway symbols, maybe not even that big. I don't even think it's that big. So the first part is just sort of the context and the introduction. It lays out the purpose and intent of the plan, how the plan is to be used as a document to inform and help guide and make decisions. The next chapter, chapter 2, is vision and core principles and goals. These were built on a foundation based off of input from thousands of people. So we listened to what was most important to people. We did detailed analysis of market and demographics and projections and issues that were both raised and discovered through research. And based on what we heard and researched, we crafted the vision and goals. The vision, I'm not going to read it. It sort of explains and paints a picture of what we would like El Paso County to be over the next 20 to 30 years. And again, this was taken and derived directly from comments we heard from residents and stakeholders. It wasn't something that we came up with out of the blue, because it's what we, the staff, or we, the steering committee, or we, the consultant, thought, but based off of feedback from the community. Then for each one of the different elements of the plan, we established a core and founding principle for that component of the plan. And then underneath that core principle, several specific goals that the county would be beginning to try to achieve over the life of this plan. So what you see here is just one page in the document, which goes over the first 5: land use and development, housing and community, economic development, transportation and mobility, community facilities and infrastructure. There were another 5 or 6 different categories on the following page. Again, each one had a core principle, and under each core principle were very specific goals as to what the county was to try to achieve over the next couple of decades. The next chapter is land use. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this chapter than the other chapters, because of how important this chapter is. At the core of every comprehensive plan or master plan is land use, all right? That is the core. When Mark was even sort of describing what the department was called over the years, as the name of the department has changed, so has comprehensive planning. Comprehensive planning used to be, 100 years ago, a land use plan, and it was essentially a map, all right? Then it became, T.J. Kent came along, and it was a general plan. And the general plan was basically land use and transportation. And then over the years, it's evolved into a comprehensive plan, and now it addresses all sorts of things: community facilities, the natural environment, sustainability, housing and residential areas, economic development. So they truly are comprehensive documents. And so I want to go over the 3 main components of the land use chapter, because this is most critical. And everything after this, the transportation, the community facilities, the economic development, the housing and residential areas, all begins to domino off of the land use chapter, all right? This is the core that sets the stage for that. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time. It's broken into 3 things: key areas, areas of change, and place types. So I'll explain what each of these are. The first thing is the key areas. And when you look at an area that is as big as El Paso County, what we decided to do was step back and say, what are these key areas of the county that, regardless of what type of development takes place what kind of conservation takes place, what type of infrastructure needs to take place or growth takes place. These are things that are necessarily going to influence development in this area of the county. Or these are key areas, unique, okay? And so we've got the military installations in the 2-mile area around it. We've got the potential areas of annexation that Mark talked a little bit about. We talk about the enclaves and the near enclaves. Mark did a very good job of defining and explaining what those were as well. Small towns and rural communities, Fountain Creek watershed, flood control and gateway district, the forested areas, Pikes Peak influence area, the Tri-Lakes area, Colorado Springs Airport, Peterson Air Force Base area, and then some of the uncommon natural resource areas. So no matter what type of development does or doesn't take place in these areas, or what type of change or investment does or does not take place in these areas, these are key areas, all very unique, with all having an influence on whatever takes place in the county over the next couple of decades. So it's important for us to map these areas. Now, these happen because of either natural conditions that are on the ground or major investments like the military operations for some of these size things that are not going to go away. These aren't arbitrary geographic boundaries. These aren't political boundaries. These aren't past planning jurisdictions for small areas. Forested areas, a lot of it is black forest, but a lot of it is not in black forest. So forested areas are important, regardless of what small area it may or may not be in. So let's take a look at forested areas. So we really broke it down by key areas, not historically by what the jurisdictions may have been. The next thing we took a look at was what we called areas of change. When you tell someone who moves into a community because of its natural environment, its beauty, its rural residential lifestyle, that, hey, guess what? As you've heard, we're likely going to expand and increase in population by a couple 100,000 people over the next 20 years. That can scare a lot of folks. That's a lot of change. That's a lot of change. And change can be a little bit unnerving to people, especially because they don't want to see their quality of life diminished. And they don't want to see diluted what they moved into an area for, that quality of life, that characteristic. So we thought it was very important to say, listen, these are the areas of the county we expect to change. These areas we do not expect to change. These areas we expect to change a little. These areas we expect to change a lot. So depending on people where they live, they can look and see where this change was going to take place and how it would be managed. So we identified these areas of change on the map. The first one is the protected or conservation areas. You'll see that in the green areas on the map. These are areas where we would expect to see virtually no change. These are protected areas, conservation areas, highly valued environmental areas, among other things. The next is the really, really light yellow area, and that is minimal change, undeveloped areas. So these are largely undeveloped areas of the county, and this is primarily the eastern portion of the county, where you're going to see some investment, you're going to see some building, but it's not going to change a lot. The character is going to remain essentially the same. And these areas are essentially now primarily would be classified as undeveloped, not intense development. Next then is that sort of more golden yellow color that you see on the map. And that's minimal change, but developed areas. So these are areas, like you see Black Forest falls into these two categories, like minimal change, undeveloped, and minimal change developed. So these are areas that are already developed with rural residential or some other type of development that exists on the ground. These are areas that have a defined character. So you might see a new house go in or a new small subdivision or some new reinvestment happening over time as you would expect, a new school or maybe some new homes. You're not going to see a characteristic change in these areas. So these are areas that are developed where we would expect to see minimal change over the next several decades. And that's sort of that goldenrod color. Then we see that darker orange color primarily along the eastern edge of Colorado Springs, all right? And that is new development. And this is where we would expect to see a lot of the intensification or new development coming online. Not surprisingly, this area where a lot of the new development is going to be channeled or managed is adjacent to existing incorporated areas that have infrastructure and facilities and services and utilities. And also dovetails very closely with Colorado Springs and others proposed or planned annexation in the future. So a lot of the development the county will see is in this area of dark orange. It is immediately adjacent to or within close proximity to Colorado Springs and municipal incorporated areas. And this area dovetails with the city's annexation plans. So it makes sense that a lot of the growth and development would be in this area. And then the area in blue, Mark talked a little bit about this, some of these enclave areas are areas that will likely transition as they become incorporated, redeveloped, or developed when utilities are brought to bear. So those blue areas are sort of infill areas, or pockets, if you will, that will be transformed into something as development comes online. So we think this was a very important map. So yes, the county as a whole is going to change. The county as a whole is going to see a lot of population influx. And this is intended to show how that growth and development is going to be managed and where most of the change will take place. So it's a very important map. Along with this, we thought this was very important. And this goes by geographic area. So I said the county is 2,100 square miles. About 14% of the county by area is in that protected conservation area, that green area, about 14%, all right? About 70% falls in that minimal change undeveloped. And then about 6% falls in that minimal change because it's already got some sort of development in place. A lot of that is sort of the large lot. So you've got 90% of the county by land area that is going to see little to no change in terms of development. And I think that's important. So even though there's a lot of population and development and growth projected, it doesn't mean that all areas of the county are going to significantly change. In fact, 90% of the county will likely not significantly change, and most of the development will take place in about 10% by land area. And I think that's important as well. The next thing I want to talk about is place types and what is a place-based approach. Traditionally, land use is characterized sort of as the level of specificity of, let's take a look at residential. With the residential development, you've got large lot single family, regular single family, small lot single family, duplexes, single family attached, low density multifamily and multifamily. Then maybe you've got senior housing and maybe trailer parks, all right? So one land use, residential, and you've got 8 different categories. If you have a small town and you're doing parcel by parcel planning, you can get to that level of specificity. But for large areas, it's not the preferred method because people do not think of that level of specificity when they plan for the future. If you talk to a resident, they don't say, oh, well, I think duplex planning in the future should be X, Y, and Z. When you talk to people, they say, I want my neighborhood to be like this. And I want the areas I've shopped to be like this. And I want our business parks and our research parks where people are going to be employed to be like this. And I want to be able to drive through the county on roadways and corridors that provide access like this. They're not defining a parcel, and they're not defining a structure. They are defining and describing the places in which they live, play, work, hang out, shop, whatever. They're describing places. It's called place-based approach. And if you look at a neighborhood could have a lot of single family. It might have some townhomes on the edge of maybe by a major roadway. There might be a grocery store down at the corner intersection. There may be an elementary school, a nice park. Well, those are all the components of a very attractive neighborhood. It's not just single family. So the approach on a scale like this is to set up things called place types and to define and describe the different places of the county and then to begin to plan accordingly. So we've identified the following place types for the county. It's the rural, the large lot residential, the suburban residential, urban residential, rural centers, regional centers, employment centers, regional open space, mountain interface areas, military, and we include the area around the military, utilities, and then the light gray areas are all the cities, the incorporated areas that the county does not plan into. So I'm going to show you how we describe each one of these. So this is the suburban residential, an example of it. And each one of these place types has a 2-page spread in the plan. The first page describes the character of the place type. So in this place type, we're talking about suburban residential development. So we talk about the size of the lots, the character of development, the primary land use, this being single-family detached residential. We talk about some of the supporting uses you might see in this neighborhood, including parks, schools, some commercial retail, maybe on a corner somewhere, institutional uses like schools, single-family attached, like maybe some townhomes, but the primary use is single-family detached. We then provide a number of photographs to begin to get a sense of character for what these areas generally are characterized as. And then we show again, the map of the county showing where this type of development is planned. So the character of the suburban place type, the land use primary and supporting for the suburban residential place type, and a map showing where that type of land use and development is anticipated to take place. The next page does a 3D procedural modeling of that area, taking all those characteristics into place and producing a procedural model that shows the type of residential development, some of the open space that we would expect to see, some little bits of commercial that might be on the major roadways, how a school might fit into this. We identify all those characteristics by bulleting them out below the image. We talk about the function of supporting uses, additional design considerations for development to take place in these areas, but show you what this type of development characteristically and procedurally could look like. So the first page describes it in detail, photographs, maps, and text. The second page provides a 3D rendering of what it would look like. We do this for all the place types. So I just showed you the one, but we do this for all of them. The next thing is housing, and we want to take a look at priority development areas, the housing mix, affordability, and environmental compatibility. So priority development areas for housing include this up here. This is the housing framework. So the green is the mountain interface. The light green is the rural. The yellow area, that greenish yellow area is large lot residential. You then have suburban residential, again, is that sort of goldenrod color. Urban residential is more the enclave areas, the infill pockets, the hole in the donut, if you will, like around Colorado Springs, where it would be more dense residential. And then you see that hatched black area, and that is, regardless of the underlying anticipated residential development, these are sort of the priority development areas. So they're tucked in close to the urban edge where utility extension and annexation makes sense. We then take a look at some...
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yeah.
I want to stop you there because I know there's a lot of concern, consternation about that terminology, priority development areas. Can you go into that a little bit more?
You bet. And so, I don't know if I can go back or not. Let's try this. I saw something flash up there. Not hitting the X. All right, I'm just going to talk through it then. So the hatched area of the priority areas, you can see here, priority it aligns a lot with the priority annexation areas. That black hatched area is that area right along sort of the eastern edge of Colorado Springs. Pardon? Woohoo! Thank you.
Thank
but I know some things. Okay. All you do is just click that.
So simple, a consultant could do it, right? Maybe. Okay, there you go. So, and I want to make this distinction clear. When we see development proposed or land use areas identified, the county doesn't have a bunch of bulldozers hiding out around the corner, and as soon as the plan gets adopted, we're going to roll out and start developing stuff. This is a 30-year plan, a 20-year plan. This is driven by market, okay? A developer might see a piece of property. He'll see if it's consistent, or she'll see if it's consistent with the plan's recommendations. They'll get a contract to purchase or develop the property. They'll develop a plan. They'll meet with staff. They'll go to the plan commission. They'll have to seek approval. There'll have to be a public hearing. So there's still that lengthy process in place to get development to happen. But what this does, it prevents that leapfrog development. It prevents the premature conversion of rural lands into developed intense areas, okay? This says these are the areas of the county due to utility proximity, planned incorporated areas or annexation, where facilities and services already or are planned to be extended to exist. And this is where we can accommodate the projected and needed growth while having minimal impact on the majority of the county in terms of area and character and land use. So when I say these are priority development areas, these are areas where we would anticipate development to be proposed, and these are areas of development that we would anticipate seeing happen prior to areas further out to the east or to the north or to the south in areas that would require an illogical extension of resources, both in services and infrastructure, and would have a bigger impact on the rural character and environmental character of the county in areas where we don't want and or anticipate it. So what this says is we are going to be accommodating growth appropriately, but we are going to be managing growth appropriately, so the right type of development and land use that is desired happens in the place where it can be best accommodated, while minimizing and mitigating any potential negative impact to areas of the county that might be more rural or undisturbed. So this hatched area indicates where we would anticipate that type of development taking place as a priority versus further out to the east and disturbing those areas. And it's really about proximity to existing utilities and services and potential for annexation. So that's a very good question. So again, this begins to show how this dovetails with what Mark talked about earlier, and that is the annexation potential of the city. And we wanted to plan in conjunction with the municipality. The county can't plan in the city's jurisdiction, but we know the city will be growing, and we want to coordinate with that effort, and that's what we have done. And there was a lot of back and forth with the city, and they were cooperative partners to in that regard. The next thing I want to take a look at is the urban residential priority development areas. And what this does is it begins to map those areas that are sort of designated for urban residential and talks a little bit more specifically about each one of those zeroed in, as opposed to stepping back and talking about them categorically on a larger scale. So same notion, we just drill down a little bit more detail and map some of what we're talking about. The other thing we had to address was the housing mix. A lot of people want to live in rural residential or large lot. That's great. And we need to provide for that, and we do. A lot of people want to live in suburban residential. A lot of people might want to live when they sell their ranch, they might want to live because all their friends are here, their church is here, their not-for-profit organizations, their volunteer networks are here, their family is here, but they don't want to maintain that big of a property, but they want to remain in El Paso County. What does that next stage look like? What is that next product they want to move into? What about the tech company that moves in over the next 10 years because this is a booming, high-quality, desirable place to live? Where do those millennials live? Where do those 20-somethings live that are young professionals, high earners? Where do they live while they get their roots before they make that next leap into a larger piece of property? What does that attractive, high-quality residential experience look like for that generation of El Paso County resident? What about the El Paso County resident that might not be a high wage earner, but valued and necessary nonetheless? The person who works in the service industry, or a teacher, a police officer, or a not-for-profit worker, or anybody who wants to live in something but can't afford something really expensive. What does that accessible housing look like? What does that look like? Are we providing housing across a diverse platform of product type for every stage of life and for every socioeconomic level? This is the future that we have to accommodate, not only your existing population, but your future population. So we look at these things. So we look at things like housing impact, the need for a variety of housing, because different people want different types of housing at different stages of life. And the best way I've ever heard it described is, just because you change your lifestyle doesn't mean you should have to change your quality of life. So you go from a ranch to a large lot residential, to a suburban residential, to a townhouse, to a condominium or an apartment building in an urban setting. All along the way, you're living in your community. You are changing your lifestyle from a ranch 5 moves later to an apartment. But should your quality of life change? Absolutely not. So can we provide housing for that spectrum, that journey? So that's what this talks about. We talk about maintaining the different county character areas and the strategic approach to providing housing needs. We look at income comparison, attainable housing for rental and owner-occupied. We sort of increase density targeted to specific areas, but not everywhere. Permitting a wider variety or a mix of housing types depending on where it is. Looking at employing financial incentives. Take a look at the homelessness situation, which is primarily being addressed with the county support, but in the more urban areas. The affordability disparity, the community trust, land trust, and housing co-ops. So I'll go through just a couple of things. I'm not going to go through all the housing because we'll be here till tomorrow. But we look at owner disparity, the affordability of housing, if it's owner-occupied housing, and where it is or isn't more affordable in the counting by zip code. We do the same thing by renter disparity. Where is it more affordable? Where is it less affordable by rental properties, not owner-occupied? The next thing we take a look at in housing is environmental compatibility. No type of development by development type will occupy more space than housing. You'll get some commercial centers, you'll get some commercial uses, you'll get some employment, but by sheer volume of land, residential occupies the biggest for development. So we look at rural character, conservation easements, conservation design by place type. And so the first thing we did is we mapped all the different sort of conservation districts in the county. We identified sort of those key rural character areas and these conservation easements, these areas that really have an impact on development that takes place regardless, but particularly for residential. And we introduced the notion of conservation design. And the conservation design really puts a priority on the protection and stewardship of environmental areas, habitats, and features. So we can still accommodate a lot of new development, but new development is accommodated within the context of the environmental features and the ecology of an area that exists before the development was there. And this begins to lay out how stormwater management, density, environmental features, all of these things can be incorporated into new residential development going forward. Depending on what type of residential, it doesn't matter. The next, we take a look at economic development. This is the business, the industrial, and the commercial areas. And what we look at here is we break it down into rural centers, regional centers, and employment centers. And we begin to map these areas in the county on where these types of uses should be taking place. And again, detailed 3D modeling and photographs and character descriptions are in the place types for all of these areas. We take a look at the priority areas, the mixed-use centers, these areas that need not just the commercial or more suburban areas or dense areas, but the rural areas as well. So these begin to map out some of these priority development areas that you'll see here. This is Glen Eagle and Falcon. We map them out. We talk more specifically about these areas. We also take a look at business development, not retail, but employment-based, whether it's warehouse, distribution, research, incubator, technology, where these things might go in terms of clusters going forward. You also have several airports in town which can serve as anchors or catalysts for a lot of the locations of these types of uses going forward. So this section talks about employment priority development areas, and this page that I've pulled out of the plan begins to talk about some of the areas around the different airports. We also talk about workforce development. When we talk to industry leaders, one of the most important things they talk about in terms of attracting and maintaining and growing business here is having quality workforce development and workforce population. So we talk a little bit about that here. We identify the different county resources that they have to bear. We identify the different zones and programs and enterprise zones that exist in the county that give the county the resources to help leverage the growth of employment uses throughout. Next is transportation and mobility. And I'm going to go through these a little bit differently than land use. I went through a lot of detail. As Mark and Craig both said, there are a lot of areas of the county that have plans in place that are very thoroughly created and vetted, and they are on a regular basis. Transportation is one of them. There is a transportation master plan for the county. So we're not looking to replicate, replace, or redo that. The job for the master plan is to dovetail and coordinate and support that, and to use the transportation master plan to help inform the land use plan and vice versa. So we take a look at all these different components: roadways, bike and ped, transportation, multimodal, airport, and railroad. And we begin to take a look at impact fees and related plans and studies the county has. We look at functional classification, road system performance, jurisdiction. The county doesn't own all the roads in the county, and you know that. The cities don't own all the roads in the city. The state owns a lot, the county owns some, the city owns some are private. We take a look at the Pike Peaks Rural Transportation Authority, access management, and a number of other issues. We begin to map out some of the key things in town. We look at the Colorado Statewide Transit Plan, projected out to 2045, the county's 2016 Major Transportation Corridors Plan, and the updated version of that. We map where all these roadway improvements are already planned by these other studies and incorporate them in the master plan. Public transportation is robust in some parts of the county, not so much in other parts of the county. So we need to take a look at this and how it might grow going forward. So we map in here the park and rides, the state transit plan that is relevant, and some of the multi-jurisdictional coordination that is required. Here you see some of the different public transportation routes that exist right now within the county. And then walking and biking. Some areas are not very walk friendly, you know. When you have a study area where you can drive at 50 miles an hour without braking for a long time and still be in the study area and not pass by anything during that travel, not the most walkable environment. And that's fine. That's not the characteristics of those areas. Other areas, as development occurs, we need to provide for the opportunity to walk and bike safely and to walk and bike for recreation. Two different functions, both very important. So we try to identify and dovetail with the counties, the cities, and other jurisdictions' attempts to provide a network for walking and biking throughout the county. Again, obviously some areas, the trails and sidewalks are much more robust than other areas where it's not. Where it's not as closely, tightly knit, major regional connections for biking should still be in place. So we go through here and we coordinate with all the other efforts that are being done to provide a network of connectivity for walking and biking, and that's what that map shows you right there. So maybe a more robust network than some of you might even know or realize. Airports, again, a tremendous asset of which transportation is only one small part of the asset. Economic catalysts and other things are a part of it as well. But you have several airports. I don't know if you know how many you've got, but you got a bunch. There they are. Some military, some civilian, but you have a lot, and a lot of economic activity can rotate around these, serving as catalysts for the land use designations, and they clearly impact what's going on around them, not only because of FAA regulations of what you can and cannot put in different flight zones, but just because of the compatibility from a planning perspective of what should go around some of these. So we break them down and talk about each one. Then we also talk about, again, rail. I won't go into this in detail, but it can play an important part of moving materials through the county. Next is community facilities. Community facilities are quasi-public. They contribute to quality of life. They're not privately held. So we're talking about county government, public safety, and education. And this is going to begin to really highlight some of what Mark talked about and what I said at the beginning. There are a lot of authorities at place in the county, a lot of jurisdictions taking place in the county, a lot of entities providing services and facilities that residents consume and need for a high quality, safe quality of life that the county has to coordinate with, not necessarily provide. So we'll take a look at public safety, we'll take a look at community facilities here real quickly. Here's a little snapshot of public safety, which I think is pretty interesting. There are 21 different fire protection districts. There are 68 different fire protection or public safety facilities in the county. That alone is a lot to coordinate. And at the very beginning of the process, we sat down and chatted with some of the district officials and fire marshals and some of the other folks. But this is the distribution of these emergency services and facilities throughout the county. It's a pretty extensive network that your residents depend on, regardless of who is providing that service. Education, we talk about a patchwork or a quilt of organization. You have 288 educational facilities in the county. That's a lot by anybody's measure. And the distribution is pretty robust. There are 219 public schools, 69 private schools, 17 school districts. This map says a lot. So from a jurisdictional perspective, regardless of individual institution or school structures, these are the school districts that exist in the county right now. So know that when residential development takes place, what districts will likely be impacted the most because of where those planned residential areas are going to be. It sort of goes without saying that as you grow by 200,000 people, there will be a need for expanded and additional school facilities going forward. But this begins to show you the complexity of school districts. Again, the county does not have authority over these districts, but should view these districts as partners in providing that quality education, facilities, and network needed for county residents over the next 20 to 30 years. So one of the things the county is known for, among its many other assets and qualities, is its great education network and support system. Next is infrastructure. Needless to say, when you grow, you need utilities. And a lot of the areas of the county don't have them. But a lot of the areas of the county are poised to be able to get them. There are a lot of service providers in the county for utilities, as well as water and other sort of needed infrastructure. In other states across the country, county growth is not very robust because it's set up that they have to have municipal facilities. And so when you see intense development happening, you know it's going to get annexed. It doesn't happen and remain unincorporated. It's a little bit different here because they have different providers besides the county and the city that can make development realize and happen while remaining in the county and not being incorporated. It's a little bit different than a lot of states. And it's a challenge in some regard. But we take a look at water, gas, electric, alternative energy, and telecommunications. Telecommunications is crucial. If you go back to the early 90s, or I think it was 98, there was a federal Telecommunication Act. Remember when cell towers first started getting proposed? I can remember going to meetings where they had to get a special use permit, and there'd be 300 people in the audience because they thought they were going to give people cancer. And that's if it was, a mile away from everybody. And people didn't know what they were. And they started getting denied across the United States. The federal government had to jump in and say, hey, listen, Federal Telecommunication Act, you can control sort of where they go and have your local regulations to make sure they're in the right place and whatever else, but you can't flat out deny them. Because like roads, like water, like sewer, this is necessary infrastructure. And if we're decades behind on telecommunications as a country, commerce, we're in trouble. So they recognize it as necessary infrastructure. Now it goes without saying. But high band internet, gigaspeed, everything else, these are necessary components of that infrastructure like everything else, which is why you see telecommunications up here along with water, gas, electric, and we just talked about roads. It's all crucial. So water, again, we're not reinventing the wheel here. When we did the master plan for Aurora, week one, I was in the mayor's office talking with the mayor, this is 4 years ago or so, and I said, okay, 3 most important issues facing Aurora right now. He's like, that's easy. Number 1, water. Number 2, water. Number 3, water. And he recognized the fact that water is very important. You have a 2018 county water master plan. These are thoroughly vetted, created in detail, very specific, and very important. We're not looking to replicate or duplicate or undo that, but to coordinate our efforts with that. So we really take a look at quality, the management plan, and your existing master plan. So we look at the 2018 County Water Master Plan, the supply and demand gap based on your aquifers, your distribution system, where development is right now and where it's headed. What you see here on the map is the 2018 water study planning regions from that document. And there are technically 8 regions, but it looks like more because 4 is broken up into 4A, 4B, and 4C. We then take a look at storage and conservation of El Paso County water. We sort of explain what an acre foot is by volume because that's a terminology that's often used. We identify the designated water basins in the map on the right. You can see where they are. This is important. And I think this map is very important as well. We take a look at the projected growth areas, and what you see, this is from the 2018 County Water Master Plan, this graphic, and what this shows is projected water demand. And the circle size, I'll read it off, is relative to the gap in current demand and projected 2060 demand per 2018 Water Master Plan planning region. So this shows where projected demand is going to increase. And this is over the next 40 years, is what these circles indicate. So the larger the circle, the greater the demand will be in the future for water. And you can see a lot of this coincides with where we anticipate growth taking place. Gas, again, another one of these sort of mosaic or patchwork maps that show just how extensive the different service providers are. We take a look at Black Hills Energy, Colorado Springs Utilities, and Interstate Gas Company. And then we take a look at, this is from the Colorado Natural Gas Utilities image is where this map came from. And it shows the county and all the different areas. Same thing here, this is for electric. And we do the same thing, we take a look at Mountain View Electric, Interview Mountain, Southeast Colorado Power Association, Fountain Electric, and Colorado Springs Utilities. And again, we map where these are. One of the nicest things I think, just real quickly, about a master plan is it gives people one place to look at some pretty relevant stuff. They can say, where's my fire protection district coming from? Where's the local facilities? What's my utility provider? Where's the nearest school? What school district am I in? Well, you can really, what's the land use? You can see all of this in one document. It's very informative for the resident. So we also identify some of the alternative energy, discuss it at great lengths, and we identify the solar projects and the wind farms in the county right now. And telecommunications, and we talk pretty robustly about this and the importance of this right now. Crucial for not only residential quality of life, but in terms of a commerce. If you want to attract high-tech, research, industry, and you don't have good high-tech infrastructure, that's a tough win. So you really need that sort of telecommunications network in the county. Chapter 9 is military. I'm very proud of this. We had a couple of different consultants working with us, Tetra Tech and HB&A. They worked on the military base alignment study a couple of years ago. We brought them on board to facilitate and make sure this was a very robust component. They led that charge as part of our effort. And again, I've worked with a lot of plans across the country with a lot of military involvement and facilities. This may be one of the most robust ones, and I think the county and staff and the committee should be proud of that, as well as the participation we got and the feedback we got from military representation. They're at the table. They are stakeholders, they are partners, they are county residents, they are stewards of this area from an economic a protection, a safety, a national perspective. They're really great to have at the table. I can't say enough about them. There are pros and cons and there are challenges to dealing with these. That's the reality, like any big institutional use. But having them at the table is great, and the plan really addresses them, and there are several of them. There is a requirement to not only look at these facilities, but a 2-mile notification zone around each one of these. When development happens within that new mile notification area, it's got to be done with the notification of what's happening. And that's why coordination is so crucial. This impacts infrastructure, adjacent land use. It could impact conservation. It could impact the intensity of development, transportation, traffic patterns, you name it. So there has to be a very close coordination between these efforts. And you can see here the military installations in blue and the 2-mile notification area around them. But it's why, as you go throughout the plan, this is not an afterthought, because look at the land area. Name another land use that has this big of a footprint, or a place type that has this big of a footprint. There aren't many. And so this is done with great diligence and intention throughout the entire plan. So installation recommendations and coordination for transportation and access, land use compatibility, utility development, stormwater management, air and ground operations, and joint land use. So next chapter is Parks and Recreation and Tourism. As I indicated before, all comprehensive plans in the state of Colorado have to at least address tourism. They don't say to what extent, but you have to address it. Fortunately, you have a very robust regional tourism authority and effort being underway, which is pretty extensive and very good. So we took a look at Parks and Recreation and Tourism. We took a look at service level, depending on what part of the county you live in, additional lands that may be needed to meet that demand, regional trails, then state and federal land. So the map you see here is the county parks service area analysis. So the green identifies the county parks. That dark blue area is a 0 to 5 minute drive time to a county park. The medium shaded blue is a 5 to 10 minute drive time, and the lighter blue is a 10 to 15 minute drive time. So you can see that where most of the population is in the county is very well served by county parks. And this isn't taking into consideration homeowner association parks or city parks or other parks or recreational amenity. These are county parks. So parks, outdoor recreation, natural environment, consistently identified as one of the most important things to residents and even the business community, because they want to attract good employees, and that's an important quality of life component. So we took a look at the entire El Paso County system, the service area, and what that meant, and so we've mapped all that out here in GIS, as you see here on that map. Next, we took a look at tourism, the Regional Tourism Act, Colorado Springs and Pike Peak, Destination Master Plan, environmental tourism, and the economic impact. Needless to say, the economic impact of tourism is fantastic for the county and one of the reasons why it's so highly prioritized. If you take a look here, this is trails, so biking and hiking trails. And you can see how that network becomes more robust as you go from east to west. Probably more interesting walking around the mountain areas if you're mountain biking than if you were 30 miles to the east in some of the flatter areas. And you can see that road network. So we talk about that in the Pike Peaks area, there's approximately 450 miles of trails. In the Colorado Springs area, about 290 miles areas. In the El Paso County area, further to the east, about 130 miles. So walking, hiking, biking, a huge part of environmental conservation and integration, and a huge part of the tourism component. Chapter 11 is community health. Again, you have community health plans in place and people working specifically on this. So we dovetailed with that effort. We took a look at the 2018 Community Health Improvement Plan of the county. And again, we wanted to make sure that we were providing the opportunity for increased access to healthy food, to increase walking and biking, to increase safety through the community facilities and public safety chapter with fire response emergency services, and all tie this back to the ongoing larger umbrella effort of community health plans. So we took a look at equity and walking and biking in the county. And here you can see food access. And depending on the color, we show the percent of people in that area and the relevant ease or access they have to healthy sources of food. And this is coming from the county's department. The second to last chapter is the environment. Again, this was the theme that we heard from cradle to grave, so it got its own chapter. We took a look at water features, natural land, wildlife protection, and wastewater management. We took a look at the surface water, groundwater, riparian areas. Riparian areas are like rivers and creeks. It's basically flowing water and that unique habitat that exists adjacent and running along the flowing water. And the master plan alignment for your plan. We also took a look at conservation and tied it back to the conservation design element in the development and housing chapter, and identified wildlife protection areas, the different species that exist here and the different habitats that exist here, and how to begin to protect these areas better through protection and management of these areas, education and awareness programs, species management areas, researching and monitoring these areas, and then bringing into place some of the policy for conservation design that we identified throughout the plan prior to this chapter. We then took a look at resiliency, and this is one, again, that's not unique to the comprehensive plan, but when you have things like New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy on the East Coast, Hurricane Ike, the wildfires that you'd have experienced here and in California and elsewhere, the flooding that's occurred up and down the Mississippi. After a couple decades of some pretty crazy things happening, the approach to resiliency and hazard mitigation has changed. It used to be historically, something bad happened in terms of a natural disaster or hazard, let's get in there and try to recover. That was sort of FEMA's approach, it was communities' approaches, it was state and regional approaches. Over the last couple of decades, that has shifted is, can we be more resilient on the front end? So we weather the storm literally better. We are then able to recalibrate and get back on our feet more quickly, so the damage on the front end is minimal and we are more resilient. It has changed the approach to how quickly can we recover to how better we can be prepared to weather the storm. So resiliency is a big deal and hazard mitigation is a big deal. Disaster response and resiliency and recovery. So again, you have a lot of ongoing efforts now. You have hazard and resiliency plans already in place. We wanted to dovetail with those for several different things. Here we map some of the burn perimeter for some of the fires that you've had locally to give you a sense. Some people are keenly aware of these. Some people might be less so if they're not in an impacted area. But water, flood, fire, these are all very important impacts that we need to calibrate for, and we do in the comprehensive plan. This is the same thing for flood impacts, dams and flood zones throughout the county, and the different rating system for that. And then disaster response and recovery. We talk about the Pikes Peak Regional Office of Emergency Management. Most resiliency and hazard mitigation and emergency response is done at a county or regional level with smaller jurisdictions participating in the plan and then adopting it once it's done. So you have some of these plans already in place, and you can see there off to the right-hand side the documentation and response, mitigation, preparedness, and recovery that you've already got on the books that we're dovetailing with. And the last chapter, very quickly, is implementation. This will not happen overnight. This is planned to take place and unfold with market involvement over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. And even then, some of it might not happen, all right? Things change. Who would have predicted a global pandemic 18 months ago? So things, or the market crash in 08 for housing. So things can happen. But this is the best foot forward. And implementation begins to show how the county, with its partners, can begin to implement this over the next decades plus. What the county's role is, who they should partner with, what the partner's role is, the timing of it, potential sources of funding, and the priority for some of these things. So we identify how to regularly use the plan, how to develop and maintain partnerships that are essential in getting the plan done. The county can't do all of this. It can't. You have to identify the strategic partners and work together. Maintain public communication throughout. We've had some real challenges with COVID over the last year, and I think we have calibrated and done as good as we possibly could have, and I think the end results speak for themselves. But maintaining public communication going forward is essential, and as Craig said, plans need to be updated. You can't rely on a plan that's 40 years old, folks. You can't. You can't rely on a plan that's 20 years old when your community is changing so rapidly. So you got to take a look at it every once in a while. And it should be used, some of the things that will happen more quickly, the plan should be used to update your regulations. Zoning is not planning. Zoning is a tool used to implement planning and community aspirations and recommendations. So one of the first things that the county should do while it sets a course for implementing this over time is say, this is the plan for the county. This is our policy. This is what we want to achieve. We now have to go back and look at our regulations that dictate what you can and cannot do where. Do your current codes require a level of environmental conservation design that you should be? Does it promote the right type of zoning to get the right kind of development in the right place consistent with the plan? Right now, no. So one of the first things you will need to do once the plan becomes adopted and serves as your policy foundation is starting with that foundation. The next level then is to begin to look at your regulations, your rules, and say, do these rules reflect our policy? So this can be happening right away. So housing, there's a lot you can do for housing, for economic development, transportation, parks, and environmental. We identify the best sources of funding for all these recommendations. Federal funding and state funding is grouped by category. There's federal and the timing, I've been on 4 phone calls over the last 10 days that didn't intend to talk about this, but the conversation very quickly went to, what do we do with the funding we just got from the federal government? Because it was a lot. And what do we do and how do we get in front of the money that's going to be coming? It's going to be a lot. So the timing begin to put into place to implement a lot of this could not be better based on the commitments that seem to be being made at a national level to fund a lot of these local and jurisdictional efforts. So the timing is very good. And they're broken out by housing funding, economic development funding, funding to begin to sustain the environment, to protect areas. This is how we group funding. So we begin to identify all these in an action matrix. In plan, we talk about all the different types of funding, what the funding is, what it's intended to be used for, so the county can begin to go after it. And that may be changing soon as new funding rolls out. And at the end of the document, we create a matrix. And this matrix is all the specific things we think the county can start doing. So it's not just a document that's overwhelming and we can't get at it. This identifies the core principle. It's broken out by chapter. For each chapter, we reiterate the core principle for that chapter. We identify the individual goals identified under that chapter. For each individual goal, we identify the objectives to see that goal accomplished. And then we identify the specific strategy the county should undertake to see that objective fulfilled, that goal reached, to get back at that core principle. So we've really tried to provide a level of specificity that will arm the county with what it needs to start getting stuff done. We don't live in a world now where people have the luxury of planning for the sake of planning. We've been through decades of that. We now have to do planning with the intent to get something accomplished. This begins to delineate how to begin to get that accomplished. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark to sort of go through this last piece about the website. Again, thank you so much. We're here to answer any questions, obviously. It has been an incredible journey. I can't reiterate enough the hard work that has gone into this by so many people, a level of support, stewardship, and investment that we seldom see, which says more than anything else to me that people who live here absolutely love it here. And regardless of whether it's a differing opinion or not, they give it consistently because they care about what happens. And that's the biggest takeaway. So whether it's opinions we necessarily agreed with, that supported what we were doing, or liked what we were doing, or didn't, I respect all of it and welcomed all of it because it reflects nothing more than a real love for El Paso County. And that was very refreshing and encouraging. So, Mr. Chairman, thanks so much. I'm here for any questions the rest of the day.
Thank you. Ms. Nunez.
Tess. Hi, thanks. I just had one question about the community engagement. You outlined it, but I was wondering, given your experience in other communities, how did we compare? I know it was a hard year to reach out to people, but how did we compare as far as getting enough and good community engagement?
Yeah, I thought you did very well. And I know people will, it's a great question, by the way. A lot of people will say, well, that's only X percentage of the population. Well, I've been doing this for more than most people. I've done probably more comprehensive plans than anybody in the United States. That's not bragging. This, that may be a guilty admittance. I don't know, but I've done a lot. You're never going to get by percentage what perceives to be like a representative. It's not a statistically valid sample size, if you will. But the feedback we got was very intentional. It was very thorough, very thoughtful. We had thousands of our people participate. And a lot of people who did give us their input recommended constituents of a much larger community. So we heard voices from individuals that were reflecting the input to them from other people. We sent the draft plan out to over 200 organizations and agencies and said, please spread us what you think. We directly sent review links out to, I think, over 2,000 people, and we had over 3,000 people participate in the process. So what we heard back was great. It was very insightful. To be honest, it was more robust than what we heard in a lot of communities, maybe not by percentage, but by what we heard. And by percentage, part of the challenges was, we're talking about an area that's 2,100 square miles. A lot of people, what happens in terms of planning just doesn't register to people. People come when something hits their radar, and there's a lot of background noise. People are busy. This year, there are a lot of people on people's minds other than county planning, a lot of things. So the feedback we got was great. It was very specific. It was very detailed. We heard feedback consistent from the beginning up until just a couple of days ago. It never waned. So I think the county, the residents, the business organizations, the military, the different jurisdictions have all done a fantastic job of letting us know what they think. Yep.
Any other questions at this time?
Mark Gebhardt, Planning Community Development Department. We have a few more slides to go. And I would note, Commissioners, as we've gone through this process, public involvement has been a challenge. It's been an extreme challenge. And there's some technological challenges that have occurred. Not everybody has high-speed internet and to pull up the documents and details. But I hope we've overcome that to a certain extent. We can't solve it, but we've tried to do the best we can to get that public involved. We've gone through how we started it. We've gone through the presentation. We have a document now that's as a part of the review. Now, how do we get all those agencies and the public and everybody to have that process to end up with the final document? So at the end of this process, there are a number of ways people could interact and view the documents. This is our department webpage here. You just click on your El Paso County and it pulls up the master plan webpage. Everything is on the master plan webpage here. There have been times where some of the meetings may have not been as frequently noted on the website, and we've tried to respond to those as we've had those comments. On the county's main page, our PIO office has placed the information, and it's been on here for, gosh, a month or more almost, to try to have people steer towards the new master plan. It's right there on the page if people followed the county's page. They've advertised in local newspapers, et cetera. They have the final involvement in this part of the discussion. It's been newspaper articles in the Gazette. I think you saw several of those that I provided, and those are just the latest ones, not the early versions of the documents. I had one, interestingly, I had one person contact me and said, you need to advertise more in the Gazette, or you need to have information. This is the very first time I've heard it, and there's been reference that folks in the Black Forest, they have a very extensive mailing list for public involvement, over 2,000 people as a part of that. And some people received those notices and then made contact to us. This person said, I got the notice from the Black Forest and I'd never heard anything about it. Why was it never in the paper? Well, I gave him the copies of the paper articles. And he did respond in a nice manner. He was originally not very nice and responded in a very nice manner to those. On the reverse of that, I had a comment from someone that says, I got the same notice, but why aren't you advertising in the local newspapers? Well, we did advertise in the local newspapers. He said, I don't get the Gazette. It's whatever document. There's people that don't like the Gazette for whatever reason. So there's no easy way to accomplish some of this, and we've tried the best that we can do to get the public involved in this process. And there's been a big challenge with it, considering the pandemic and not having full meetings. And we've had to make some modifications to the project proposal. We initially were going to have public meetings at the end of the process and go through that. And we have not been able to do those.
Mark, I would tag on too that we've had master plan updates from county staff every other week for the last 2 years at this body. And so anybody that's interested even remotely in the planning process or in county government probably had the opportunity to be exposed to the discussion about a master plan when we meet every other week for 2 years.
You're right. It's been reported here. Everything is live. Everything that we do, people can listen to. The advisory committees are posted on the website after the meetings. The public meetings are posted after the, we had a public meeting on the 31st of March. I think there was 75 people at one point that had signed up for part of that. In your package, you see some of the questions that were asked as part of that discussion. I believe that's also available for anyone who wants to review that part of the process. We've updated the Board of County Commissioners. Those have been live. So we've tried. So review agency comments, over 200. We had an extensive list. You've seen a short list, and your package has more of those information. This is just a screen picture of some of those comments. And we've addressed those comments to a large extent. There's some comments that we didn't agree with. This version, I think, was presented to the advisory committee. For reference, we somewhat closed the public comments on the 9th of April and had a brought those to the advisory committee on the 14th of April with any proposed changes going with that. We continue to see some of those potential changes from planning commissioners, from some of the public. Military has had some comments. We also had certain public comments through that process, and we tried to separate those through the review agency process that the planning commission or the advisory committee took action on.
Mark, if I may interrupt, I think it's important to highlight here the fact that I know there have been comments that not all of these public comments have been, or public or agency comments were thoroughly discussed and vetted, and I think I want to put that criticism to rest, because not only did the staff look at literally every single comment that was received, even the cut and paste 1,000 same paragraph written, in emails, but those comments were all sent to the advisory committee as well as to the planning commission. The comments have been vetted, have been discussed, have been reviewed, and decisions were made based on that, even if it did not happen in a robust public discussion. The people that have been involved in the process from the beginning could very easily recognize the comments that we addressed that months ago, years ago, in some cases where there was criticism of why isn't this part of the vision or something like that. So I just want to be clear, given this opportunity, that the comments that the county has received on this plan have all gotten very significant airing, I believe, and the people at the table, the people at the dais here on the Planning Commission are fully aware of those things and have seen those comments at least once, and many of them we have seen several dozens, possibly hundreds of times. I can think of a few sentences that I know I read repeatedly. So for anyone listening, for the public to understand that, yes, your comments, your voice has been heard throughout this, and we have this forum and another opportunity later for overflow for people to weigh in yet again. But we have taken that, the importance of public participation, public comment, we have taken that very seriously, and will continue to do so until the end of this process. But your voice has been heard, and I just want to make sure that people understand that.
And there were comments from review agencies and the public that we agreed with, and some we disagreed with. One we disagreed with is said, close the borders and stop all growth. Or, and ones we did agree with, and you may have seen it on some of the early pictures, there was a lot of comments. For example, in Black Forest, the La Forêt ownership is a large parcel of land, and they've sold other portions of their land off for development or being brought into adjacent property owners, and we showed that as high priority for growth. And the citizens said, we don't like that. We heard that a whole lot of times. And if you've seen it on the drawing and the maps and everything else, we've taken out that high priority for growth. So we deleted that part. They asked us to do that with Flying Horse North. We chose not to. And the reason we chose not to is it's potential annexation area from Colorado Springs. So we're trying to match those maps rather than, and to put them all together in one. So we have, as Tom indicated, we have listened, but we may have not agreed. Now we're at the stage of it's almost there, but there's a few little things left to finish that are very simple. The word are instead of is, plural versus singular. We've got a few of those things to fix, and we'll have some of this discussion when we about how to make those changes. We've included a resolution for approval that provides, and that's very typical when we do a big document, that says make conforming changes. Change in text that doesn't change the meaning of things to get to the final publication. And we'll ask you through that process on the 26th meeting to give us that authority if we don't have them all fixed. Right now, we're taking comments from folks, and I have 4 or 5 different comments already that's already started on a table here that we'll be reviewing. The nice thing is Nina's working with our editing people. She's got Bluebeam up, and if we have comments through this process we have today, especially this afternoon when we have comments, we may be able to do some online discussion of those comments with potential changes that we could take forward. We don't believe any of the comments yet are those that require further details by the advisory committee, but we would bring those forward to you presumably at the 26th meeting of the month as we receive them. I've got about 5 so far from various people. If other planning commissioners or the public has additional comments, they can certainly email me. So where do we go from here? We still have a planning commission hearing for the adoption. Right now, we're not asking for adoption. For anyone who's listening in the audience, this is the first hearing. At the end of this meeting, we'll ask you to carry this over or take it on to the next meeting, being the 26th. After you take an action, if presuming you approve it, there is a process for certification. To make it official, you have to do certain additional things going forward. We've had all things in the past. We've noticed this meeting. We've noticed the 26th meeting. We've included the military bases in the review. We've satisfied those criteria that are in statute that have to comply. We've tried to list those all in your adoption resolution, which you have a draft in your process. And after you take those actions, which could include conditions of approval in that action to make this change or do something different, then we go through the process. The Planning Commission certifies this to the Board of County Commissioners. That'll probably be at some form in June if you approve it in May. And then after you approve it, we have to certify it to the planning commissions, to the military, to the state Office of Smart Growth. And so we've set that process up. Okay, it's under the Department of Local Affairs, and it used to be you had to send all your master plans through the Department of Local Affairs and all your regulations, and they really weren't reviewing those. They didn't have staff to review it. And then the Office of Smart Growth was created a few years ago, and so we'll comply with the statute. So then there's implementation after this. And we talked previously about some of those things. Is how's this used going forward? And John spoke specifically about that. And those plans will be in place to try to then implement the plan to make this a document that doesn't just sit on a shelf. So, are there any questions? It's been a long morning for presentations.
Mr. Carlson?
I have just a couple kind of high-level questions. I think that my first one was answered by the consultant, but does the master plan trump zoning at this point? In other words, when somebody brings a development plan to us, and there might be a current commercial zoning, but the master plan says, no, we want single-family residential here. Does one trump the other at this point, or how is that going to work?
The master plan is an advisory document. Yeah. The Board of Commissioners makes most of the development decisions, and it is a guidance document or advisory to that. In your specific case, they do a development plan, they would have to change the zoning. And typically the purpose of the master plan is to then, you would take the next step to implement the master plan. People would make rezoning applications consistent or conformance with that master plan.
But if an existing zoning were in place that were opposite of the master plan, they wouldn't have to do anything. They could just...
They don't have to do anything, and that's a very important point to bring up. One of the many comments we got is if I have 5-acre zoning in the Black Forest, then the suggestion is that this plan automatically doubles the density. It does not. The 5-acre zoning is there. Any development approval has to conform to the 5-acre zoning, or that zoning has to be changed to end up implementing it. Through this master plan, if you have residential property in our plan suggests it should be employment center industrial, that doesn't change the underlying zoning that you have there. You would have to make an application to change that zoning to then implement the master plan.
Great, thank you. One other question in that regard, and that has to do with how is it going to look to us, the Planning Commission, when this master plan is approved, when we're going to approve, when we're asked to approve something. We've got a criteria of what we need to look at to approve something, and now this master plan is going to be added to that, it sounds like. How much of it is going to be looked at or put forward for us to consider? And I'm getting at the detail. I understand the place types and all that, and that would be something we'd look at. But my concern, I guess, is looking at some of those implementation areas in the master plan and all the very specific suggestions in there. Are those going to be those goals and specific strategies? Are those going to be looked at when you make a presentation to us? Or are you going to say, well, goal number such and such and strategy this, we need to look at that as consideration for approval on this?
Absolutely. As you see your current staff reports, you'll see how it conforms to the master plan or guidance on a land use application where it references the policy plan and then the small area plan. The same or similar type of discussion relative to the matrix at the end of the document, the goals and the strategies, et cetera, those will be brought forward to you specifically in your document. The end result of the process is we will also receive GIS maps that will pictures of what the master plan place types will probably be brought into your staff report to show you or attached at the end of it. So that'll give you an idea if somebody wants to have high intensity industrial or commercial in a low residential, then you can see those conflicts and how there's some changes. That doesn't mean it can't be changed, and it doesn't mean there's not some policy objectives or some strategies that could occur that may accomplish some of those things, but there would likely be some form of mitigation or compatibility analysis or other things to accomplish those types of things.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mark right now?
I think for those folks listening in the audience, if they are listening, both in the audience and online, if they are listening online, I think our agenda says that we'll take a lunch break at this time. And you will announce that, and we'll, I think, have public comment after that lunch period. I think the timing is probably about right, isn't it?
Almost as if you planned it that way. So yes, I believe unless there's anything else that you'd like to cover right now, we'll go ahead and recess for our lunch break. And I believe we've scheduled public comment to begin at about 1 o'clock, so we'll be back at 1. Great, thank you.